Hello and welcome everybody to our third Psychosocial Wednesday webinar this year. Before we start, I want to thank, as usual, the ILP for supporting this initiative in this year. And especially, I want to thank Institute of Freedom for producing this event. And maybe I repeat that at the end of our webinar, that we remind you that we have our next guest on April the 19th will be Rula Maria Dipp. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. Our guest today is Renate Daniel. She is a Jungian analyst working in private practice. She is also a psychiatrist and psychotherapist and program director and teaching analyst at the Jung Institute in Küsnacht. And a lot of tasks you have, and a member of the Scientific Advisory Board in Lindau. Renate has published numerous articles and lately the book Psyche and Soma, a holistic approach to understanding the mind-body connection, which was published by Daimon. Her topic tonight will be healthy body, healthy mind, ? And I want to remember you that the first century Roman poet, Juvenal, wrote a little poem where he said, Orandum est ut sit mens sana in corpore sana. Or in English, you should pray for a healthy mind and a healthy body. And I think this will be the connection, Renate, to your talk. One short comment still. The concept of the mind-body relationship developed by Jung himself describes the interaction of the psyche and the immune system and helps to overcome inappropriate ideas of guilt, for instance, or illnesses or any illnesses. It can also be used to solve conflicts and repressed feelings. Jung's insight into emotions and imaginations and the creative power of the psyche have informed current research into the effects of placebos, for instance. Based on all this knowledge, Renate Daniel asked the question, what effects does psychotherapy have on the body? Renate, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this friendly introduction. And I will share some ideas with you, and let's see how long I can talk, and then there will be the possibility to ask questions, not only to what I'm presenting, but let's say to the whole topic, and hopefully I can give you an answer. Let's start with C.G. Jung, or with an example. Perhaps some of you know that Maria Callas was a famous singer, born in Greece and later with the Italian passport, and she died in 1977. And recently, somebody asked, did she die due to a broken heart? And as Jungians, you know, and also in daily life, we knew this metaphor, the broken heart, and usually we don't think that this is something that belongs to the body. But today, let's say, modern research shows that deep grief or stress can cause severe organic damage to the heart and even cause death. So broken heart is not only a metaphor, it's also something physical. And today, even the so-called happy heart syndrome is described. For example, during the Soccer World Cup in Brazil, not many, but perhaps 3 or 4 people died because they were so excited and so amazed because their club was winning that the emotion caused a damage in the heart severe damage, and they died. So it's not only metaphorical, and this brings or leads to the question, what is the connection between the body and the soul and the psyche? Those of you who studied C.G. Jung know that he started his career at the university in Zurich, the so-called Burg Hölzli, and in 1903 he started with the so-called word association research. He had many healthy volunteers and did the word association experiment, and one result of this word association experiment was that all of us, all healthy people, have so-called complexes in the psyche, like organs in the psyche, or I prefer to say it's a kind of knot. And this knot or this complex is, let's say, a storage of relationship experiences, sometimes difficult relationship, not always, and they are always connected with inner images and emotions. That's what more or less every Jungian analyst knows. But not all Jungian analysts know that he did not only do this word association experiment, but that he was interested in physical parameters. Not always, but very often. He was able to measure the breathing, which means how fast and how deep is the volunteer, the proband, breathing? What about the heart rate during this experiment? And especially, what about the skin conductivity, which means what about the sweating system of our body? And he found out, and that's very important, and it was very difficult with all the devices at his time, 120 years ago, that the emotions, and this means the complexes, are anchored in our body. So the skin conductivity, the heart rate, and the breathing system, let's say it that way, is influenced by the complex. Yeah, it correlates, and that's why it's important to say that a summary of this research shows the complex is a psychosomatic entity. And all of you working with the complexes in analysis or in psychotherapeutic work are working with the body. Nevertheless, it's something unconscious, but it happens simultaneously. So for you, it's perhaps not astonishing that the emotions are connected with the body. When you feel distressed, then perhaps you experience that there is a pressure on the heart and that there is something with the bowel. So we know it already from our daily experience, but he did research on that and could show the correlation between our body and our emotions and the complexes. But he did even more. And that's also very important for our daily life, for sometimes for our beliefs, because, let's say, inspired by a Russian neurologist, Mr. Takhanov, he did something else. What did Takhanov do? He had 4 groups. He did 4 experiments. First of all, he tickled the face, he touched the face of his volunteers with a feather. And then for me, he had the brilliant idea that he announced, I will touch your skin with the feather. So it's not something physical, but only to announce what he wants to do, so that the volunteers, the test person, the proband knew, aha, something will happen rather soon. The third experiment he did was, he said, please recollect feelings of anxiety, feeling of joy, let's say a negative or a positive emotion. And the fourth experiment was to say, let's do some abstract work. And the interesting fact was that announcing that he wants to touch the body, or the task to recollect some emotions, led to a physical reaction. So the skin conductivity, or the heart rate, or the breathing, let's say our breathing system, is already reacting when we have some inner images or when we recollect emotions. So to imagine something, to have a fantasy, especially when the fantasy is connected with an emotion, means that this is an embodiment. Imagination is not something that is only spiritual or in our mind. It's connected with our body, or it leads to a reaction. So if whatever, let's say, saying you use in your mother tongue, in your language, in German, we would literally say, it's only imagine, or you are just imagining it. And it means very often it's nothing. That's not the truth. Already these very old scientists, or this very old research proves that emotions and even imagination has a correlation in our body. There is a physical reaction in our nervous system. Yeah, that's important. And inspired by these experiments of the Russian neurologist, Jung in 1905 had some volunteers, and he pricked them with a needle. And of course, when you touch the body, there is some pain, there is an emotion, and this has a reaction in all the three things he could measure: heart rate, skin conductivity, sweating, which is sweating, or breathing. That's obvious, and we are not astonished. And then he also said, he only announced, I will prick you with the needle, and there was the same result as in Russia, that without touching the body, which means fantasy, expectation, and imagination, have a deep influence on our vegetative nervous system. Yeah. So these results are 120 years old, and for me, that's the fundament, yeah, of psychosomatic. Of course, today we have other possibilities. We can do much more precise research and different research, but everything that I will talk about later shows that for me it's a thread from C.G. Jung to modern research, yeah, and it matches, it works, but of course it's more detailed and more precise. So psychotherapy, sometimes we are doubting, what do? We have, let's say, only words, but as words can lead to emotions, as words will cause some memories and imagination, which is a key method in Jungian analysis, has a physical reaction. So we are always working with the body. Yeah, that's for sure. Of course, there are different approaches. Let's say there are words, and then, for example, we know painting, and then there is sand play. It's more and more physical. But everything together is also a work with the body, with the autonomous nervous system. And when we don't forget these early scientific research, the results of this research, we can understand how easy it is to re-traumatize a person. A single word, an inner image, and connected with an emotion, everything will, let's say, the whole body will go back to this traumatic experience. And that's why it's so important to see that this research already can explain that this happens. We don't know how it happens, but we know that it happens. And the research of C.G. Jung and his colleagues already help us to understand that the so-called lie detector will work because you are in distress. There are questions you have to ask, and as soon as you are in distress, as soon as there is some pressure, then of course the skin conductivity, there will be a reaction, you will be sweating, but for sure the lie detector cannot prove that you are lying, but it can prove that you are in a complex. May it be some anxiety, may it be an authority complex. There will be an effect, but we don't know why. Yeah. So you could say the task would be to find out which kind of complex is it, what content is it. But the reaction, that's for sure not difficult to understand due to the research Jung did. Let's already start to go or to find a bridge to modern research. Let's say approximately 10 years ago, an IT specialist, a woman in the United States, she had a young son suffering from diabetes type 1. And if we compare the year 2020 or 2010 with Jung's time, the devices he had to use for his research, it was very difficult to build them and to measure everything with paper and so on. Today, most of us, we have these wearables. You do not have to go to a laboratory. You can even do it at home. And so was the case with this IT expert. She had a boy, 4 years old, suffering from diabetes type 1, and she was able to measure his blood sugar, also other parameters of the body. And she found out that every Tuesday morning, the blood pressure was extremely high. And she didn't understand why the blood sugar, sorry, not the blood pressure, the sugar was very high. And they found out that every Tuesday morning, he had, there was a person in the kindergarten, and her son was very anxious. And so this anxiety had an impact on the blood sugar. So you see that today we have the possibility to check that our emotional situation has an impact on many physical parameters. Here it's even the blood sugar. Yeah? That's what we can see today, or what we can show today. That wasn't so easy to, or wasn't possible at Jung's time. But this is the, let's say, these are modern techniques, modern possibilities, who also show that there is an effect of that. So that's one aspect, the word association test, the complex, our emotions are anchored in the body, or something happens in the body. That's what we can show in the autonomous nervous system. Now there is, let's go to something else. Let's talk at least, or I want to describe some aspects of the so-called placebo effect. The placebo, if we want to define what this is, it's something without a pharmaceutical active substance. That would be the definition. And how does that work? It's also to summarize what I want to say. Very often laypersons or even physicians or psychiatrists, they say, oh, it's only placebo. And that's similar to, let's say, to talk about imagination. Oh, it's only an imagination. Yeah, it's only an inner image. But I wanted to show, no, the image has an effect on the body. And it's similar with the placebo. It's not only a placebo, but something happens in the body. how does this go? What do we know today? There is a lot of research done in Italy, and a famous scientist is Mr. Benedetti, yeah, and he summarized a lot of the results of the placebo effect. First of all, what is a prerequisite that the placebo works? It is the person who is taking the placebo has to know the effect. So, this is something that helps to reduce my anxiety. It's something to reduce the pain. Yeah. So you have to know that there should be an effect, and you have to expect that it works. That's the prerequisite of the result, that it works. And so you can say, you have to expect there is an inner image and there is some hope. That's what we know. That's from outside. But today, due to neuro images, scientists could show that the placebo, which is no substance, no chemical substance, works in almost the same areas in our brain compared to, let's say, antidepressant medication. So the same areas in the brain are, let's say, activated in a similar way. So the difference between an active substance and the inactive substance is not that much. That's what the scientists can show. But the longer you are taking the placebo, the more the effect will diminish. It will be reduced. And many scientists have the hypothesis that perhaps there is a physical reason, and that can be that it's not the same for sure how the placebo works in, let's say, in the brain. It's some physical compared with the substance. But there could also be a psychological explanation, and that's what we already can find in C.G. Jung's work. What do I mean? Jung, in his association experiment, as I already mentioned, he had some volunteers, and he announced that he will prick them with the needle. And then he could show that there is a reaction in the body. But the more often he announced it, the more his volunteers got used to it, the less they were excited, the less there was, let's say, an intensity of an emotion, and the less you are excited, the smaller is the reaction of your body. Yeah. So it's very important that there is this excitement, that you are astonished, that there is a lot of hope, and then there will be a physical reaction. That's what we can see. So faith, belief, trust in somebody, enthusiasm will lead to a physical reaction. The better the physical reaction will be. That's what we can, or what is the result of modern research. There is something else that's also very interesting from my perspective, because, for example, if a person gets a painkiller and he or she is not informed that this is a substance and will help to reduce the pain, the effect will not be, let's say, very high. Or in other words, you can say, if it's not mentioned, if it's not explained that it will reduce the pain, the effect of the substance is not as high as it could be. So what we can say, whatever you are taking a placebo or taking a medication, let's say a chemical substance, there is always a mixture between the effect of the substance itself and, let's say, the addition, the psychological effect. If you know that it works, against pain or against depression, then the effect will be better. So let's say pharmacy earns some money because of the psychological effect of the placebo effect is always present because there is always an expectation. And that's why, for example, if a client of mine is very much in doubt when I propose to prescribe a medication, if he or she doubts and is reluctant or hesitant, usually I don't prescribe the medication because there will be a negative effect. The expectation, which is the placebo effect, will work. There will be a physical effect. That's what we know from the modern research. And then I'm careful and due to my experience. So you see that to imagine something, to expect something, and the emotions that are connected, they are very important for our understanding of treatment and let's say the efficacy of medical treatment. Let's say now a third part. Let's talk a little bit about a modern field of research. That's the field of research, let's say the connection, psyche, and our immune system. This field of research started a little bit more than 40 years ago. It was a psychologist who did some experiments with rats. What did he do? The rats got cytostatic drugs, which means chemotherapy. And you know that we use that to treat cancer. And you know that this has an effect on our immune system. Usually when somebody has to undergo chemotherapy, they have to be very careful because the immune system is, let's say, not in a very good state, and the risk to get an infection is very high. So you have to protect yourselves. And so when he treated these rats with cytostatic drugs, of course, the immune system was suppressed. That was not astonishing. That was no surprise. But then he combined the chemotherapy, let's say it that way, the toxic medication, with a sugar extract. And this had a special bitter taste. So it was a combination. But this sugar extract had not any effect on the immune system, but it was combined. And several weeks later, the rats got only this sugar extract with a special bitter taste, but it was harmless. And the psychologists in their research, they were very much astonished because even only with this sugar medication, the immune system was suppressed. It was no toxic medication in it. So you could say there is a kind of condition. Later, a researcher, a female researcher, did a similar experiment with students. What did they get? They got an injection with adrenaline. Adrenaline increases, or let's say it shortly, it activates our immune system. And the students, they got some adrenaline and they got a fizzy powder with a nice taste. And similar to the research I described before, after several weeks, the students didn't get any adrenaline, so not any activation of the immune system, but only this fizzy powder. And the result was, again, the immune system was conditioned. So the taste, the memory, whatever it was, there was an effect on the immune system. So again here, the immune system, that's the first result, and you shouldn't forget it. It's not only something physical that has an effect on our immune system, but our memories, taste, emotions have an effect. And that's very important. And if we go back to the association experiment, also our imaginations have a big effect on our immune system. That could be proved by a pediatrician in Germany. She, in a playful way, helped children to learn something about their immune system. Yeah? They learned some details, and then they were instructed, in a second stage, they were instructed to imagine that a protein, a special protein, should increase in their salvia, in their mouth. And of course, afterwards it was tested, and that's not very difficult to take the salvia, and it worked. So the imagination had an influence on the body and on the immune system. And this, then there was another research that's very important for us. 5 weeks long, the researchers, the scientists, took salvia samples from the mouse, from patients, and from their therapists after the session, after finishing the session. And when let's say, the psychotherapeutic, the analytical session was helpful, and when it was a stress-reducing session, it could be shown that the hormones of our stress system, but also the immune globulins, the proteins, were better. So the stress is reduced, shown by the hormones, and the immune system improved too. So that's perhaps why some analysts get very old, because if it's a fruitful work, it has a very positive effect on our immune system. And now there is something that's very important for the pandemic. There is a lot of research in that field, psyche and immune system. For me, it's I will show you an example. The scientists, they made an artificial wound on the hand, of course, described 8 millimeters, and they took a group of students of medicine. And they set this wound during the holidays, and they measured how long will it take until the wound is healed. And they did it during the semester break, and they did it a week before they had to go to take the exam. And we all know that to pass an exam is a kind of distress. But when you compare it with situations, let's say daily situations we have when we are in distress, I dare to say that the exam is not the highest distress we have, and especially not in the world. There are many very difficult situations, but the result is very important. Making the wound, this small wound, during the semester break, compared the same students, the same wound, 10 days before they have to pass the exam. It needs 40% more time before the exam until, let's say, the wound is healed or closed. So you see that some distress has a big influence on our immune system. Yeah. And that now, if we come closer to the pandemic, we can see there was a research many years before the pandemic, I guess 2017 or 16, there was a group of 420 healthy women and men aged 18 to 54, and they were artificially exposed to some viruses, rhinoviruses, only a cold or a flu. And it could be shown the more distress, the higher the probability of catching a cold. The more distress, the more severe the clinical signs of a cold were. And the more distress and the less socially integrated the volunteers were, the more severe were the symptoms. So you see how important the psyche is. It's not only the amount of viruses, it's also the psychological situation that influences, let's say, the process of the disease, how severe the disease is and how long it takes to recover. So all these, and of course, there is a lot of research. All these results show, according to the physician and psychotherapist Christian Schubert in Austria, for him, the psyche and our immune system are one. We cannot separate it. Yeah? And he had the hypothesis already before the pandemic that global panic reactions are at least partly responsible for the spread of a pandemic. Because if there is a lot of pandemic, if there is a lot of distress, the more severe a disease will be. And he even found out how important the economic situation is for our immune system. Already in 1992, there was a research in Japan when there was an economic decline. Yeah, and in one research, they compared 96 taxi drivers and 96 civil servants of the government. What was the difference? In the economic decline, the civil servants, the income was stable because they were paid by the government, even if the economic situation was difficult. So there was an outer stability. The taxi drivers, of course, if there is less money and if there are problems in economy, of course, they didn't have that many guests. So there was anxiety and instability, and it could be shown that the inflammation markers in the blood and in the urine were very high in the group of the taxi drivers, not that high in the group of the civil servants. Yeah? So you see that the immune system is always connected with our psyche. And what the psychoneuroimmunology can show, that if there is some joy in your life, if there is some cheerfulness, if there is some laughter, if there are some jokes and humor, this will reduce the inflammation markers in your blood and will help you to recover, for example, from arthritis and so on. So positive emotions have an impact, a positive impact on the inflammation markers, on the immune system. But now you could say, well, that's very good for positive psychology, but that's only one, let's say, one side of the coin. Because if you are able to deal with, let's say, so-called negative emotion, difficult emotions, like helplessness, like fear and hatred, anger, humiliation, if you really work on that, it will also improve your immune system. So the healing of wounds will be easier. There will be lower cortisol level, which means that the hormones of the distress systems are lower. Yeah. So it's not only about positive emotions. To work on the negative emotions has a very positive effect on our immune system. And let's say it that way. The to summarize it, because of course I would need a lot of time to explain more, what could be shown that if you are working with complexes, and this means usually with wounds, we are wounded, we have conflicts, we feel helpless and so on. If you are able to work on that, and if you find a way for more self-agency and to be creative and playful, this has a very positive effect on your immune system, also on your autonomous nervous system, a very positive effect on something that is in a way cannot be seen that directly because it's hidden in the body. Today, of course, we have the possibility to make research on that. But so psychotherapy has many, many effects on the body. That's what we have perhaps to consider. Let's go back to something we Jungians are interested in. For example, when we are discussing fairy tales, or when we are interested in fairy tales, you know that it says, in day when wishes still came true. That's how a story can begin. Or in golden times when wishing still helped. Yeah. Or, you know, there is a saying, faith can move mountains. And today, many, let's say, many people would say, that's outmoded, that's old stuff. We can't believe in it. Yeah, that's our ancestors, they were a little bit stupid, let's say it that way. But all the research, starting from Jung, the research on placebo, the research on our immune system shows this is something real. That's not outmoded. Of course, our ego cannot willingly decide if a wish can come true. And that's why Jung said, I will quote here, at least one quote, wish, hope, desire can only be effective if one comes in contact with something that used to be called God's power. In the collected work AIDS, you can find it, which means you have to be connected with something archetypal. But when you expect, and it comes from, let's say, from a deep part of your heart, it's really not superficial, then there will be effect in the physical world, in matter, inside or outside. Something will happen. Yeah. And that's why some are questioning pilgrimage or quantum healings, or you know that in the church there are relics, yeah, you can touch it, but the emotions that are constellated in such a work, the expectations you have will have an effect in the body. There can be a person questioning or being astonished that you go and visit a person, but if you are fascinated, then something can happen for good or for bad. That's what we don't know, but there will be an effect. Yeah. And I guess that's important. Jung, in a way, already with his methods, found something that in more details we can prove today. And that's very important for our daily work, for our daily life, and for our work as analysts and psychotherapists. And I will finish. I thought I can open another chapter, but it's not enough time. I'm very happy that Ruth Ammann, I guess most of you know her. She is an analyst at the Institute and sand place therapist. She treated a woman with an incurable muscular dystrophy. It's an inherited disease, yeah, of the muscles. And of course, that's a very severe disease. And she did the sand plate process for several years. And the physicians were very much astonished that there was a slowdown of the progress of her disease. The disease cannot be cured, for sure, but the slowdown was unexpected by the physicians. So you see, the psychological work she did in this process of sand play, and in her book, it's described there was a lot of hate against her destiny. There were many, many difficult emotions, but working it through, positive effect, not only on her psyche, that she found her way. We tend to say it's the individuation process, but it also had a big impact on her physical health. And that's why I think it's very good to know more about that. Yeah, to see what is the effect of our work, of the analytical work and the psychotherapeutic work. I don't have the time, but I will encourage you perhaps to work on the worldviews we have. All the results I showed, that's what we know today. It's a kind of knowledge. But there, and of course, this is important for our work, much more than I could present today. But the second, perhaps, part or a second chapter, another chapter would be, what is the underlying belief? What is our theory, how body and psyche are connected? Some neurobiologists say we are not able to find out how psyche and body are connected. What is first? What is next? What causes, let's say, something in the psyche or in the body? I tend to say that there is no cause, not the psyche is first or the body, but that's my individual point of view. I see that there is something that is simultaneous, that Jung's idea of synchronicity could explain how it works, but that would be another lecture. I guess this is important for our daily life, and the other is more a philosophical approach, but this philosophical approach is usually helpful because when we have different worldviews, how psyche and body are connected or related, this can lead to many misunderstandings. Yeah, but perhaps one day I can talk about that. So I will stop here so that you have the possibility to ask some questions to what I already mentioned or to something else.
Thank you, Renate. That was very interesting. Just a short announcement. Everybody who wants to put a question to Renate, raise his virtual hand, and then the moderators will unmute them. Before that, I have a question. Can we say that the body is a sensory organ for the mind?
That's already a philosophical question. Yeah, for me, I'm fascinated on how many layers they are working together, or could say, or as I already mentioned, I prefer, or I have to say and to highlight, I believe that I believe the theory that body and mind are a unity, but we can only perceive it in two ways. That would be the idea of the synchronicity, that there is something underlying we can't perceive, what Jung called the unus mundus. Yeah, and so it could be that if something is activated in the psyche, there is also an activation in the body. And it can be that we can see it or perceive it. That would be my emotion. Let's say I'm in distress or I'm anxious, then it's more prominent. And usually I'm not aware about, let's say, my immune system. That's why there we need special investigation or special parameters to measure. But for me, it's like both aspects are active. Yeah. And so for me, it's not the question what is first, but that's a belief. That's a theory. I can't prove it. For me, that makes sense or that's plausible. But others, the most neurobiologists, they prefer that matter is the substance. That's what first, and the psyche is a result of it. Yeah. So
it's the other way around. It's the other way around.
Yes, and that's what.
It's the other way around.
Okay.
A short comment to that. I do some research on constellation works, family constellation work. And when you are in a constellation and you're coming towards the end, or you are and you have a certain feeling, a certain emotion coming up in your body, then you know the constellation work has been successful and can be finished. Mm-hmm. So there you have the body teaches the mind somehow. Mm-hmm. I give the question now to Alice. Alice, can you unmute yourself? And please remember, everybody, we are running a bit out of time, so keep your question short. Alice.
Pegando o gancho do que trouxe agora, do corpo ensinando a mente, gostaria de perguntar sobre a relação do movimento corporal, da dança, do yoga, enfim, de expressões corporais, como possibilidade de acesso a material inconsciente.
I didn't read about that, but after all I mentioned, I tend to say that the movement and the perception of the body is very important, that the more you are aware and the more you can express, it can help you to integrate something or to bridge it. I forgot to mention, when I try to make a short summary of Jung's research and his own experience, you could say there is the image, the imagination, the fantasy, the memory, then there is the emotion, and there is the body. And with dancing, there is a flow. Yeah, there is the body, the emotion, and then there will be an imagination. And this the flow is so important because that's the old chemical idea, solve e coagula, yeah, solutio, and so that there is a connection, and that it's not fixed. A symptom will not stay fixed or petrified, but there is a flow, and then something can happen and can change and can be transformed. And I can imagine that dancing is very helpful.
Raymond Harrison?
Yes, isn't what you describe as placebo just a catchword for anything that's not physical or material?
The weird thing is the placebo effect starts, or that's difficult to say, that's already a thesis. It starts with an expectation. It starts with hope. It starts with fascination or belief. But today we know that it's physical. So I tend to say we know that that there is something physical. It's really both, but it starts with the idea, and you believe that it will reduce your pain. Yeah? And then the pain is reduced, and it's not only in your body, but the neural images can show that there is an activation in the brain. Yeah. So it's really also, it's both.
And your talk really leads us to think that there's something that's greater than psychosomatic, which is binary, something that's greater than mind and psyche. And you mentioned emotions, imagination, and memory. And I can't help but think that that underlying something that you talk about just might be consciousness itself, in the sense that a complex is an interrelationship of different parts. And it seems like in the placebo effect, whether it's imagination, emotion, or memory, some different parts are coming together to eventually, yes, have an effect upon the physical.
Yes, yeah.
A comment to that, maybe what you called, Raymond, this thing in parentheses between mind and matter is information. We can see that maybe this is a link to the placebo effect. When you have homeopathic medicine, there is no physical carrier, it's only an informational carrier. And it's the information which is in it which might heal you, not the medicine itself.
Yeah. Bernhard, I can add, there is a physicist in the United States, Archibald Wheeler. He had the so-called it from bit hypothesis. Yeah. And he
it's
said
it's not only Wheeler, it's
of course it's only the example, that
it's actually an idea.
Matter has its origin in information. Yeah,
it's actually an idea coming from I wanted to tell you that, but it's a little bit far away.
Yes, and it would need a second lecture to show and to see what are there are, let's say, what I collected, and there are perhaps more. There are 5 ideas how it could go. And one idea is that information is the substance, that would refer to homeopathy, or could explain the placebo effect we have. But it's more, it's also the belief, the expectation, and then it's connected with emotion, and then something happens.
The original idea came not from Wheeler, but from Weizsäcker.
Okay.
And he has gone much further than what I said earlier, that and what it from bit actually means, bit from it from bit, yes, that on the basis of it, it's the information on all of it. Yes. Okay, any further questions? Tiago.
Yeah, I have this question. First of all, sorry, I'm from IT, so I probably I'm not using the proper words for the question, but yeah, my point is, if a person that suffers with some kind of depression, that person interacts with emotion and external factors in a different way. How these chemical changes or psychological disorders impact in our body wellness, even if this person has some kind of personal positive thinking, optimistic attitude, and like a very good environment, but internally she has this problem. How that could also like the mind is controlling the body in another way, you know?
What is the question? Do you want to know more about the effect in the body?
Yeah, I want to know, like, this person has, let's say, you have a positive thinking, so your body like will be better.
Yes, that's tricky.
Yes.
That's tricky. As I mentioned, what we know is that if there are positive emotions like joy, cheerfulness, and so on, it has a positive effect on your immune system, and it reduces the distress. But usually, you know that a person suffering from depression, it's not possible usually, to bring him or her in a state of these positive emotions. But as I mentioned, if you are working, let's say, on sadness, on helplessness, on difficult emotions, for example, by expressive writing. This is described, and there is a research since the 70s of the last century. If you really face the difficulties, the difficult emotions, it also has a very positive effect on your physical health. You cannot see it immediately because the immune system usually cannot be seen. Of course, you know how often you suffer from a flu or whatever and other diseases, but it's really important to see, to work with the complexes and to be, let's say, to establish a relationship in the therapeutic work will improve the physical situation. And sometimes it seems like a side effect. When you are talking about that, it comes to my mind. I have a woman suffering from a severe depression for 2 years. And in the beginning, she had a lot of pain in her shoulder. Yeah. And when she came into the room, I already saw it. And we are working on the depression. It's very hard work, only small steps. But I don't ask her, but I see that there is no pain in the shoulder anymore. I guess if I ask more, she will focus on that, but it can work that something happens in the body as a kind of side effect on establishing the therapeutic relationship. Sometimes it's not that obvious, but for sure there will be an improvement. But we know it's difficult. And the question is what resonates in the person, which kind of word really touches her or him. But we are always working with the body. That's what all these, what the research starting from Jung show.
There's a question from Idalina. She asks, as complexes are also in the body, do you think it would be better to choose more material treatment as sand play, painting, clay, than oral and meditative ones?
Well, complexes, the definition, complexes are a psychosomatic entity for me. The research already of Jung shows it's something psychosomatic. And now, from a Jungian point of view, I tend to say it also depends from the typology. For example, it depends for a person with the leading function in thinking or sensation, the approach to the body may be different, or the approach to the complex may be different. If a person, and that's what we hear at least sometimes, if a person says, well, I already understand it, yeah, theoretically I know, but it has no effect. So it's like there is no flow between being more aware, being more conscious, and the emotion and the body. That's what Jung described in his own crisis. He, for example, said he had to calm himself down with yoga. And then the flood of images, he could take them, paint them, and write. So there was a flow between body, mind, and emotions. And of course, sand play means you are touching something, yeah? And then you are playing. And I forgot to mention that when we see, there is another research that shows how important playing is. And playing can be very concrete in sand play, but it can also be something in mind, that you are creative, that you are open-minded, the fantasy you have, the fantasy the patient or the client has, that you share it and that you are open-minded and not too rigid. And that's also the flow. But the question is really, can we work with everything? Yeah, so that there is a flow. That would be the summary. But the complex is a psychosomatic entity. And also the archetype. The archetype is not only an image. And it's easy to understand because the archetype includes the instincts, and that's the physical aspect. So the body is always there and important.
There are no further questions. No. then thank you very much, Renate. That was a really inspiring talk you gave, I must say.
Thank you. Thank you.
I hope to see you soon in summer in Zurich, I hope.
Yeah.
And thank you very much to all of you. And we see you in April 19th. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Enjoy the day or the evening. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.